Today I am at the site of the former Bushwick High School in Bushwick, Brooklyn. While it is no longer known as Bushwick High School, the building does still operate as a learning centre with 4 separate schools now operating within its premises. We begin the video just before the old high school though, on the corner of Irving Avenue and Palmetto Street, as this will be important to the story later on. Having multiple schools in one building is not an unusual practice in New York City. Many old schools were converted into updated schools that play host to several different schools within the one building. The previous story that I did on Seward Park High School, which was built upon the grounds where the Ludlow Street Jail once stood, is another such school that closed and subsequently became home to several schools. Normally when I visit a school, I like to give you a quick history of the famous people who once attended the school. But for Bushwick High School, this presented a bit of a problem because that information isn't readily available online. One person who I do know attended the school was Bushwick's own Jackie Gleason. Americans, of course, will know Mr. Gleason for his portrayal of Ralph Cramden in the series The Honeymooners, a show that was drawn largely from Gleason's own childhood in this very neighbourhood. And the international audience would best know Gleason for his portrayal of Minnesota Fats in the movie The Hustler. Another graduate of Bushwick High School is the undisputed world featherweight boxing champion, Amanda Serrano. The school at one time suffered from a chronic overcrowding problem, and in fact in the late 1990s, the school held twice as many students as the building was designed for. In 2001, only 23% of the school graduated, and even then those numbers are somewhat skewed. It was quite well known that the school would force students who were not likely to graduate out of the school and then subsequently not count those kids as dropouts. In the last 2 years of Bushwick High School before it closed, the graduation rate had climbed significantly to over 50%. At one point, all schools in the district had less than 25% graduation rates. But thankfully now, and this is only in the last 15 years or so, the graduation rates for the Bushwick School District are at around 75%. That's just a very quick background on the school, but that's not entirely the reason why I'm here today. Bushwick High School was built in 1912 and officially opened in 1914. But what was here before they built the high school? Between 1851 and 1898, this plot of land between Putnam Avenue and Palmetto Street, stretching from Irving Avenue to Knickerbocker Avenue, was the final resting place for 30,000 people. Yes, indeed, Bushwick High School was built upon an old cemetery, which had been known as Union Cemetery. At the end of 1897, going into 1898, all of the remains of those resting in peace had their peace disturbed, and they were relocated to a different cemetery. Some of them didn't go quietly. For some of the deceased, it wasn't even their first time to be relocated. The first Union Cemetery was located on this road, Union Avenue, in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. On the opposite side of the street to where I am walking in this clip, between Union and Lorimer, and from DeVoe to Powers, that was the site of the first Union Cemetery, as seen in this 1849 map. If you live in this segment of Williamsburg, did you know that your residence sits upon a former burial ground? In 1851, the remains of those buried at the original Union Cemetery were reinterred at the new Union Cemetery in Bushwick. Once the cemetery had been relocated to Bushwick, there were some strange tales of things that went bump in the night. In 1877, a 70-year-old man by the name of Sebastian Trinkhas was discovered by a passerby to be hanging from a tree in the cemetery. He lived nearby on Bushwick Avenue with his son, but his wife had died several years earlier, and she was buried in the same cemetery where he hung himself. 1 year earlier, a policeman discovered a destitute woman and her 5 children lying down at the grave of her husband. With nowhere left to turn, she had gone there with her family, waiting to die. The police raised some money and contacted support authorities to help the family get back on their feet. When the bodies were exhumed to be relocated, strange discoveries were made. On more than one occasion, a grave was dug up, and the contents of that grave contained the remains of more than the one person who was buried there. There were also dolls that were buried with children, certainly a sight that would give chills to the person digging them up. Imagine digging away and finding a creepy 1800s doll looking back up at you. As noted by this newspaper article, some of the remains of the bodies in the cemetery were found 20 feet below ground, which makes you wonder, if there was no system for documenting the bodies, other than a headstone or a shrubbery bush, how many bodies did they leave behind? Fully 4 years after the cemetery was emptied of the bodies, a policeman on patrol discovered a human skull on the grounds of the old cemetery. Did it emerge from the ground, or was someone trying to go back to their former resting place? Being that bodies were buried as deep as 20 feet below ground, it isn't inconceivable that even to this day, the remains of some people who were missed are still buried on the grounds of the old Union Cemetery. The final part of this story is a question. Were the grounds of Union Cemetery haunted? An event happened in the autumn of 1894 that had local residents convinced that a ghostly spirit lived amongst them. It began on the empty lots between Knickerbocker Avenue and Irving Avenue, which also contained Union Cemetery. It had been reported numerous times that there was a ghostly spirit floating over the land, especially on rainy nights, leaving the cemetery and taking up residence in one of the many empty houses in the vicinity. The Knickerbocker Avenue ghost of 1894 was that of a woman, dressed in scanty attire, barefoot with dishevelled hair, who would burst out into a fit of hysterics the moment that anyone approached her. This apparition was first seen by 5 women who screamed and ran home. The following night, the brothers of these women armed themselves with guns and went out to look for the ghost. There was no sight of it until the men reached a large empty lot. It was then that the white figure arose from the ground and, waving its long arms, it let out a blood-curdling screech that sent the 5 young men sprinting for their homes. The following day they told their story to their friends and word got around quickly. That same night, in what would perhaps seem unbelievable in today's day and age, 200 men gathered at night to search for and confront the ghost. Rather unsurprisingly, the ghost never appeared, and the gathered men felt that they had been fooled. On day 4, however, a man by the name of Peter Wolfell was not afraid to confront the ghost by himself. What did he discover at 1 a.m. between Knickerbocker and Irving, where I am currently standing? None other than her ghostly ladyship. He was unable to move as the white figure danced around him, but then, with a wailing moan, the ghost disappeared into thin air. This new revelation generated tremendous excitement. After a few foggy days, a new day was decided upon, whereby now some 300 men, all armed with whatever weapon they possessed, set out once more to confront this ghostly apparition. But it wasn't just the men who were dusting off their old rusty swords. They also enlisted the services of the local police department and a newspaper reporter from the New York Times. One thing that has not changed over the last 130 years was also present on that night: a self-serving comedian. In this instance, it was that of a man who came dressed in an ancient suit of armour, with an old sword slung over his shoulder. The policeman who was present confided with the reporter that he felt that there was no such thing as ghosts, rather attributing the sightings to what he described as the worst whiskey on Long Island, that is sold right here in the 20th precinct. Whiskey that was so bad that it would make a consumer go home and rob his own house, or could make them see things such as snakes and goblins roaming around the neighborhood. That night the ghost never appeared, and after most people dispersed home, the New York Times reporter went to the police precinct. The policeman there remained rather skeptical about the presence of ghosts in the neighborhood, and quoted himself in a rather tongue-in-cheek manner when talking with the reporter. He did admit that the city of Brooklyn used to have ghosts, but since Superintendent Campbell took control of the police department, then the ghosts realized that they couldn't dare show themselves around these parts, for it was not allowed that ghosts would be able to freely roam around the precincts, knowing full well that they would be run into the station should they show their form. But the police commissioner, Leonard Wells, on the other hand, issued a stark warning. He stated that his anti-ghost orders, where no ghost was allowed to roam around the city of Brooklyn, would be rescinded should a disaster befall Brooklyn, and they consolidate themselves with New York City to become one city. The streets then, he said, would become haunted both day and night. The policeman concluded to the reporter that, yes, you may safely say that the Knickerbocker Avenue ghost is a myth. One does wonder, though, did any of the students who attended Bushwick High School ever see a ghostly apparition out on the playing fields while they were in the classroom?